So this webinar is being recorded, and if you're uncomfortable with that, you can change your name, turn off your video, but we're recording it so that you can watch it again or share the link with other people, and we'll be sending that out to everybody on our list. But I wanted to welcome everybody. I see a lot of familiar faces and names. I'm Brad Hubbard Nelson from Concord CAN, the steering group. Been on it a few years, and we're really happy to be doing this because we miss all of you. This has really been, quite a year for everybody. And so we haven't been so active in the past year because of the pandemic, but we hope that all of you have kept safe and are doing well. And I'm hoping that with some wood to knock on that the end of this is in sight. But we do want to start having more programs now that we get figured out the technology. One of the good things is that action to prevent climate change is as necessary now, more necessary than ever. And so we are happy that the president takes this seriously. There's going to be a lot of good things happening, we hope, but we have to keep on working for that over the next few years. Now, Concord CAN is a chapter of MCAN, Mass Climate Action Network, and that is a group that helps us network with lots of other groups around the state and also advocates for positive policies at the state level. And I mention that because just the other day, the governor signed into law this climate roadmap bill, which is fantastic. It's a start, but it's a big start. And there's a lot to look forward to. We have set a goal of reducing emissions by 50% in the next 10 years from the baseline level. That's going to mean a lot of electric vehicles and electric heating, as well as everything we can do. Stronger protection for environmental justice communities, which is very important because everybody should be on board. And also a net zero stretch code being planned for next year, 2022, or at least that's when it's released. So there's a lot of good things to look forward to. And we're glad to have you all as part of our larger group and want to involve you with Concord CAN. If you want to become more involved, you can reach out to one of us on the steering committee, and we are eager to have the help. I have a poll that I'm going to run. And how many participants? We have 55 people here. So I want to know, where are you from? And I think everybody's going to be from Concord, but really interested in, this is a little test of Zoom technology. And, my goodness. Giving you another 8 seconds, but the answer is 61% of people from Concord, 26 from neighboring towns. You'll see, share the results. And we have a couple from elsewhere in Massachusetts and a couple from somewhere else. And it's glad to have everybody here. And that makes sure everybody's awake. And also, that's the only poll. We were planning to do a few. So we're going to have a speaker for half an hour, 30 minutes. And this is sort of a webinar. So if you want to ask questions, you can, but you'll have to put them in the chat. The chat can be located on the bottom bar. If you're not a Zoom aficionado, there's a little icon that says chat. And if you open that little window, you can type a question. And maybe you should start the question with a big Q : so I recognize it as questions. And when Sharon is done, we'll have a good question and answer period. And at the end, we'll also open it up for live Q&A. We're also going to have a few minutes after the presentation, as we always do, for local announcements. And at that time, we'll use the hand raising feature. Okay, so Sharon McGregor joined the steering committee recently, and she's a Concord resident, a biologist, environmental consultant, educator, advocate for nature-based solutions, biodiversity conservation, land conservation, water resources. She's done a lot. And she served as the Massachusetts Assistant Secretary for the Environment, several positions, Director of Water Policy and Planning for the Energy Environmental Affairs, and a Conservation Director at the New England Aquarium. And recently she was the State Commission to Healthy Soils Action Plan, and she was on the advisory group, and that is going to be a report coming out soon. She's been into nature for her whole life and very concerned about the rapid loss of species and biodiversity here and elsewhere. So we're going to hear a lot about this and how Sharon has a master's in public and nonprofit administration from Harvard and a Bachelor of Science from the UNH. So Sharon, take it away. Are you muted? You're not muted.
No, I'm not. You can hear me?
Yes. I
Great.
think everybody can hear you. I'm going to mute myself.
All right. Well, thank you, Brad. And thank you, Concord Can. It's wonderful to see the coffees have resumed. Thanks for being at the forefront of so many important environmental issues of our day, and for gathering people to share ideas and join in individual and collective action. You do great work. And thank you, attendees. Many of you are active in vital causes in Concord and beyond. Keep at it. I think it's a time that we can all feel empowered more than ever, really, because the issues demand attention and actions commensurate with the level of urgency. The moment we're in, the convergence of multiple crises, is scary. But let's not fail to see the opportunities they present. I tell my daughters, now ages 17 and 11, that sometimes things can get really bad. And that's what we see now on several fronts. But it's at those times when the only way is up. It's the way I look at it. I truly believe that. And this is one of those times. And I have confidence that we will meet the moment. So let's imagine Earth again, a net carbon sink, as it was in pre-industrial times. I'll walk you through how I think we can make this happen. So I work with the organization called Biodiversity for a Livable Climate. I'm a board member, and our mission is to advance the restoration of the natural world for biological diversity, life-supporting ecological functions, and climate stabilization. We speak the language of climate and the language of biodiversity. We recognize that loss of biodiversity and ecosystem structure and function is fundamental to so many societal ills, not only climate, but also economic disparity, poverty, civil unrest, wars, and pandemics. So we do this through education, outreach, scientific assessment, policy and advocacy. We collaborate with people around the world, scientists and organizations alike, and we emphasize the restoration of high carbon sink ecosystems, the restoration of these at the local, regional, state, country, and continental scales. And all of this restoration is for these purposes: for retaining water in the landscape, expanding the habitats of species, drawing down excess atmospheric greenhouse gases, cooling the biosphere, and reversing climate change. And by reversing climate change, I mean by mid-century, setting the Earth on a course back to the livable climate and vibrant living planet that sustained us in modern times, modern pre-industrial times. Now, for those of you who've heard me speak before, I've showed this slide. It's a good representation of the situation now with the climate. We are at, in 2017, we were at 407 parts per million carbon dioxide. Now we are at 415 parts per million. So that's different. But what else is represented here is the same. We are emitting about 10 gigatons of carbon through fossil fuels into the atmosphere every year. And the land and the soils, we don't know exactly the numbers, but with the land, soils, and the oceans, we're taking down about 5 gigatons of carbon dioxide annually. So when you add the plus 10 and the negative 5, you get a positive 5 contribution to the atmosphere, a net contribution of carbon dioxide of 5 gigatons annually. And this shows how much we've seen acceleration of the carbon dioxide levels, particularly in recent times, where we're now up at 415 and may actually get to 417 this year. So another way to represent the climate change is by the increase in temperatures. We are now at 1 degree Celsius increase since 1950, and half of this rise is since 2000. So the rise is accelerating, showing a long-term warming trend. And there's something called heat planet, which is very indicative of our climate crisis as well, where we've got so much heat, things are drying out. We know that we're seeing aridity in lands around the world. There's a lot of things going on with ecosystems in that regard, dryness, forest fires, and so forth. And we're seeing the destruction of biodiversity increasing at the heat generation, where that biodiversity once absorbed heat and transpired water vapor to provide cooling. So the Earth situation is critical at this point. These are all the things we're very familiar with of what the impacts are. I like to point out the biodiversity impacts, the impacts to nature. They are becoming more and more prominent, and we can see that there's extinction going on, a major extinction in progress. 1 million species are at risk. We've got land desiccation. We have dead zones in the ocean, including coral reef bleaching and dying around the world. So there's a lot going on with the nature, and the trend is not good, but we can turn that around. So why planet Earth's nature and climate need intensive care? The overarching cause is the widespread alteration, destruction of nature, especially in the last 200 years. And the loss of biodiversity is, in the numbers, we've got the current rate of global biodiversity loss estimated to be 100 to 1,000 times higher than the natural occurring background extinction rate, faster than in any other time in human history, prompting scientists to declare a contemporary biodiversity crisis impacting across fauna and flora. And with the loss of species, there's a loss of ecosystem function across the ecosystem types. And the causes here are deforestation, wetland destruction, intensive monoculture, urbanization, and primarily industrial agriculture, where we've got the industrial agriculture really driving the biodiversity losses. So ponder this for a minute. If it were possible to go back to pre-industrial times and move forward as a world society with far less destruction and alteration of nature and the same level of carbon emissions, there would be no climate crisis. Nature would be absorbing our present level of fossil fuel emissions. So that's pretty amazing. So what are the solutions? What I call the treatments for Earth to bring it out of intensive care. I've got 5 listed here, which I'm going to talk about most of these briefly and really try to focus on the net carbon sink, which is the subject of this presentation. So the solutions include teaching about, advocating for, and participating in the empowerment of nature to heal the planet, restoring small water cycles, embracing that carbon sink as our guidepost in climate decision-making, pulling out all the stops to realize scenario 300, which is a return to 300 parts per million atmospheric CO2, and ecosystem restorations at various scales. So the first of these, nature empowered to heal the planet. How do we do that? Well, we do it by restoring nature, and we also have to protect the nature that remains in order to draw down the legacy carbon from the atmosphere and cool the climate. And we need to do both, because if we don't protect what exists, then it's going to cancel out the restoration progress that we make. And protecting nature means these things: halting destruction of forests and destruction of wetlands, protecting at least half the earth in the spirit of E.O. Wilson's Half Earth program, and practicing minimum disturbance development, which I add in there because we need to do a lot better at our development to minimize the impacts. And that means disturbing less on lands we develop, including regenerative farming techniques, holistic planned grazing, maximum redevelopment over ever-expanding urban and suburban development, minimizing construction footprints, eliminating destructive site preparation practices, and going native and chemical-free in our maintenance of properties. Restoring nature means these things: restoring the major ecosystem types that are the primary carbon sinks: forests, wetlands, grasslands, and the soils underlying these. Now, more than 75% of the Earth's land areas are substantially degraded, undermining the well-being of about 3.2 billion people. These lands that have either become deserts, are polluted, or have been deforested and converted to agricultural production are also the main causes of species extinction. And if this trend continues, 95% of the Earth's land area could become degraded by 2050, which is astonishing. And that would potentially force hundreds of millions of peoples to migrate as food production collapses. So we've got a lot of work to prevent that. So this is a schematic I've also shown at prior talks, just briefly. It's showing how we can make soil and end global warming. And this is showing on a grassland system. If you have all of these parts of the recipe for soil making, you've got photosynthesis by perennial grasses, keystone species are present doing what they know how to do. In this case, the hoofed animals are there, or they have been in the past, with the bison on our prairies, dung beetles, mycorrhizal fungi, et cetera. And water is captured by the depressions in the soil made by the hoofed animals, infiltrates the soil, and it's held by the fungi. The predator-prey relationships are operating, and in present case, we see in grasslands that are being restored, mimicked, well-timed pulsed grazing of livestock, which is taking the place of the bison. And the result is soil building, which produces soils rich in carbon, water, and nutrients. So living soils produce living landscapes. So for any ecosystem, including grasslands, restoration essentially means healthy carbon, water, nutrient, and energy cycles. This is the empowered nature in a nutshell. It's really the measure of our success with ecological restoration. So if you pick your habitat, whatever it is to reestablish, these are the things that you make healthy again: soils, biology, photosynthesis, et cetera. And these are the things that need to be restored in any ecological restoration. Now, small water cycles are another piece, very important, that we need to restore on the planet. And the key ingredient in the recipe for restoring high carbon sink habitats is with their attendant photosynthesis is water. Water, more precisely, the water cycle, figures prominently in the reversal of climate change. Now, Michael Kravchuk out of Slovakia has been promoting the return to small water cycles around the world. And in this graphic, you can see in the upper left a demonstration, a representation of the large water cycles which now dominate. So you have evaporation of water from the oceans forming clouds, being transported by winds to the continents and pouring that rain down in deluge, which is really the common kind of rainfall that we're getting. Historically, small water cycles dominated, which is the evapotranspiration of water through plants to the atmosphere and the gentle raining down of water. So the gentle rains used to be dominant and now are less, occurring much less, with the large water cycles dominating. These are the causes of loss of small water cycles. You probably recognize a lot of these things, and we need to really start to reverse these causes of the loss of small water cycles, really by especially retaining water on the landscape through our better development practices and minimizing impacts on the land and restoring the nature to hold that water. So if we rehydrate the continents, we're going to restore the climate, and beavers help a lot. Thankfully, we've got a lot of beavers in Concord. I know they can be a nuisance at times, but we can learn to coexist with them. And they help a great deal to restore the water on the landscape. So in present time, a well-hydrated and vegetated earth can cool the climate and regrow ice in the Arctic, setting us back on the course to a livable climate. And we humans evolved in an ice age, but now we're in a desiccation age. Without biodiversity, the land can't hold the water. Without water retention, we can't sustain the healthy photosynthesizing vegetation and the attendant carbon drawdown, evapotranspiration, and nutrient cycling that sustain us. So we're learning that carbon follows the water that follows the biodiversity. If we have the biodiversity, we'll have water retention. If we have water retention, we'll have carbon drawdown. So with biodiversity, we can restore the climate. Biodiversity is our essential partner in moderating and ultimately reversing climate change. So net carbon sink. I'm not sure if many of you have heard about this term. It's not one that I've seen spoken about. I've been bringing this up quite a bit as really something we need to pay a great deal of attention to. And I really think that it can be our guidepost in climate decision making. So with nature so greatly compromised, we are beset with an existential threat that can be averted. If we as individuals and families, small businesses, corporations, nonprofits, in government institution, we can implement net carbon sink in daily decisions and practices. And that means aggressive carbon emissions reductions and vastly increased carbon drawdown in nature. We need to do both of these. So implementing net carbon sink practices around the globe and the planetary attainment of net carbon sink status, which is where carbon drawdown exceeds carbon emissions locally, regionally, and globally, that net carbon sink is attainable by mid-century. Now, net zero, we're very familiar with. This is what's been talked about quite a bit. It aims to balance carbon emissions with carbon drawdown so there is no more carbon going up in the atmosphere. And it's very important, but it's important especially as an interim milestone. It doesn't go the next step of removing legacy carbon from the atmosphere, which we have to do to avoid the worst impacts. So a commitment to achieving the net carbon sink, which incorporates and fine-tunes net zero as an interim milestone, is necessary to take us the rest of the way in the attainment of both nature and climate renewal. And here are the areas where I think we need to fine-tune net zero. Number one is in the false accounting of emission reduction numbers, where renewable energy replaces nature that is drawing down carbon. The most blatant example of that in Massachusetts is the recent destruction of 5,000 acres of forest lands. And the benefits of the solar arrays built on those forest lands is effectively canceled out by the release of carbon at the time of development, and also the lost carbon drawdown over what would have been the life of the forest. So it's crazy that we're building the solar panels on forest lands. We have other places, namely developed areas, we can build them. In the second example where we need to fine tune is in the use of nature as offsets for achieving net zero. So accounting carbon drawdown in nature as an offset for emissions, instead of doing more actual emissions reductions, is deceptive, and it gives a false sense of achieving net zero. Emission side actions need to actually reduce emissions, not look to nature protection or restoration as the means to account for the balance of emissions that are not being reduced. So carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions should be in one column on the climate rescue balance sheet, and the carbon greenhouse gas drawdown in nature in another column. And both of them have to be aggressive. So there's an offset example now that the Mass Energy Environmental Affairs Agency has been talking about. They're considering better management of forest soils as an offset for achieving the 15% emissions reduction they believe won't be achieved by 2050. And the Massachusetts Roadmap to 2050 legislation pledges similar avenue for achieving net zero by 2050. I say we just need to figure a way to reduce the remaining 15% of emissions. The planet needs accurate balance sheets, though we humans may not. So that's the second piece. The third is that I want to mention here is in the justification of energy production from biomass. The combustion of biofuels and other biogenic energy sources purport to recycle CO2 emissions through renewable plant materials and other biomass feedstocks. But even when they're sustainably sourced from renewable sources, the combustion from the fuels results in increases in atmospheric CO2. So that's a problem. There are a few sources of biogenic carbon that are rapidly renewable, if they're renewable at all. Biochar is one exception. So bring in net carbon sink. Let's focus on that, which incorporates the prevailing net zero goal and moves beyond it with net carbon drawdown through stepped up energy-based carbon emissions reductions, plus a new resolve for increased nature-based carbon drawdown and storage. Now, in this photo, this beautiful photo, we can see the restoration of Plymouth's Cranberry Farm to a natural wetland ecosystem complex. And this has been accomplished and is also still in progress with some more restoration through a partnership of Mass Audubon and the State Division of Ecological Restoration. It's a spectacular restored landscape, now a Mass Audubon sanctuary, and I highly recommend you visit it. There you will find inspiration and hope for what is possible. An example out west, Susie Creek, Nevada, in 1991 on the left and in 2012 on the right. The beavers showed up one day and started restoring this ecosystem, which had become very arid from grazing and pollution from that grazing operation. And the beavers did their job and restored the ecosystem. The adjacent grazing land that borders Susie Creek, through planned grazing, the cattle are helping to restore the degraded soils and sparse vegetation to healthy soils and lush grassland ecosystem. It's an amazing transformation. So net carbon sink, in this graphic, it shows the intersection of net carbon sink, the emissions reduction that we're undertaking, as well as the carbon drawdown that we wish to undertake. And so as you can see, the line going down from the upper left to the lower right is the carbon emissions going down over time. And the line going up to the right from the lower left is the carbon drawdown increasing over time. And the nexus point is where those two cross, and the shaded area to the right of that nexus is where nature-based carbon drawdown exceeds energy-based and land-nature conversion carbon emissions. So the difference between the top graph and the bottom one is how quickly we act to implement ecological restoration to restore biodiversity and ecosystems. The top graph attains net carbon sink status sooner than the bottom one, which is what cities and towns should want to realize local biodiversity and ecosystem health, drought and flood prevention, food production, climate cooling benefits. Sooner rather than later is also what the planet needs to stay within 1.5 to 2 degrees average Celsius increase in average temperature and avoid biodiversity and climate disaster scenarios. So note that a variation in the bottom graph for town or planet flips the lines left to right and top to bottom to depict steeper increases in drawdown and steeper increases in emissions, achieving the net carbon status even sooner. So this really shows that if we do both aggressively, both the emissions reduction and the carbon drawdown, we can achieve our climate goals and our biodiversity goals a lot sooner. So net carbon sink can unite the carbon emissions reduction interests and the carbon drawdown and nature interests in a common mission. So these interests don't work at cross purposes. and actually become even more effective. So if we understand and apply faithfully the net carbon sink, we can deliver the climate and nature benefits that both interests seek in the time frame that we need to achieve them. And here are those benefits, the climate benefits and nature benefits. So I think that net carbon sink is a game changer in these two ways, aligning nature and climate policy and regulatory decision-making with ever-increasing carbon drawdown, and also as a guiding principle extending to all decision-making ultimately, from the household to the corporate boardroom. So while we make choices for renewable energy and energy efficiency, we must make choices for increased carbon drawdown in nature as well, giving us a shot at returning planet Earth to pre-industrial atmospheric carbon dioxide levels by mid-century. And I can think of, if we make progress, we can have a campaign to achieve net carbon sink. I envision that properties can aspire to have signs that say, we are a net carbon sink, and thereby promote this nature restoration for carbon drawdown at the same time that we're accomplishing emission reductions by adding solar arrays to our properties and other renewable energies. So through this net carbon sink, aggressively implemented, we can realize 300 parts per million atmospheric carbon and start ourselves on the path toward that to reach it by mid-century. And here's what that implementation would look like. Here's the roadmap to getting to 300 parts per million. So you have the potential billions of acres we could restore, and in the spirit of E.O. Wilson's Half Earth, taking just half that amount, you can see that we would be able to restore billions of tons of acres per year, and billions of tons of carbon would be drawn down per year in these different ecosystems. And you add them all up and you get 26 gigatons of carbon drawdown. And this schematic shows the carbon emissions from fossil fuels holding steady, so that we don't want that. We want to reduce those emissions. But even if we don't, if we were to hold them steady, we could still accomplish this drawdown through the ecosystem restoration. But we want to do both so that we get there sooner. And this shows that we can do a drawdown that goes from 410 parts per million in 2019 to 300 by mid-century. And so let's join hands around the world to do that in stepped up carbon emissions and carbon drawdown, beginning this decade and over the next few decades. And this is what we'll get as a reward for that. This shows that if we have fossil fuel burning contributing 8 gigatons of carbon to the atmosphere, and we're drawing down 20 from the land and soils, and we're getting, the oceans will be burping out about 4 gigatons because that's reaching capacity, and we're going to start to see the release of carbon from the oceans. But when you add all this up, this still gives us a net drawdown of 8 gigatons. And that's really going to be great. So we can get to 300 parts per million CO2 by mid-century. It's possible, but only if we mobilize biology to achieve a net 8 gigatons of carbon removal per year. So we make this choice now, this decade, by our actions or inactions, and this is the choice. We can strive for scenario 500, which is business as usual. That will take us to CO2 levels exceeding 500 parts per million by the return of Halley's Comet in 2061. Or we can strive for scenario 300, which is nature's potential realized through net carbon sink. 300 parts per million atmospheric carbon. So the level of urgency is really demanding that we do this. And as James Hansen has said, if we stop burning fossil fuels today, that's not going to get us to where we need to be. We need to really draw the carbon down in nature. And we'll see these kinds of benefits, really the return of ecosystem function and all the benefits that we can derive from that. And how we do that is ecosystem restoration at various scales, with everyone participating in big or small ways. Through stepped up carbon emissions, increased carbon drawdown at the property, community, regional, and continental scales, with the aim of getting ourselves to the nexus point and beyond of decreased carbon emissions and drawdown in nature. So we want to be in the net carbon sink zone, not the rising atmospheric carbon zone. So here's my backyard, the restoration that we accomplished, what we did to restore the biodiversity and ecosystem function. We shrunk our lawn, we restored the native plants and the biology of the soils. We practice organic methods of maintenance, and after just a year or two, we started to see a dramatic return of biodiversity to our property. So we now just sit back and enjoy the show. There's an abundance of biodiversity in our yard. So our own backyard is really part of that roadmap to 300 parts per million. There's much we can do at our own properties, big or small. This riparian area we restored by returning the native plants along the water. And we did retain a small part of our lawn, which we manage organic regeneratively so that we could still have a little bit of lawn. And that works great. It's compatible with the nature that we've invited back. And here's just an example of some of the pollinators that we're seeing back. The hummingbird moth, which is a favorite of mine. And so we're very much serving pollinators. In the neighborhood or community, we can restore our parks and conservation land. Even though we may be protecting them, some of them are unhealthy because we need to restore the soils, the soil biology, in order to restore the health of the above ground ecosystem. At the continental scale, there's work going on. And I invite you to go to this link. John Liu has organized ecosystem restoration camps, and he's got several of them now around the world. And we're working with him to try to have these camps in the United States, one in the Northwest and one in New England, where people go for anywhere from a couple of weeks to a few months to restore an ecosystem. And it's a wonderful experience. People are talking about the enjoyment of just helping to restore the planet and making new friends at the same time. So I encourage you to go to this link and consider signing up to participate in one of these ecosystem restoration camps. So rather than witness the destruction of nature, as has been my experience, I want my two daughters to witness and participate in renewal. In this presentation, it's about what I suggest is the real solution to the biodiversity and climate crisis, committing to and implementing net carbon sink with everyone participating in big and small ways. Net zero is an important interim milestone. Net carbon sink is the prize. So let's all work together to achieve that. And we can do that locally and beyond. So I really look forward to working with many of you in that. And let's get to work and make it happen. So I'd love to
Thank
hear
you.
thoughts and questions, comments.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Great presentation. And we've got another 20 minutes. I'd like to spend a few minutes on a couple of announcements. And if you have an announcement to make, what I'd like you to do is go under reactions and raise your hand, and then I can unmute you. There's one announcement I wanted to make that for Scott Richardson, who couldn't be here, which is very apropos to this talk. And it is about the 1440 Main Street project in Concord. There's an important meeting coming up next Thursday, April 11th at 7:15. This will be a Zoom meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals about a 16-home subdivision in West Concord. And this division is requiring clear cut of 8 acres of trees and removing 60,000 cubic yards of earth from the site. This is exactly what Sharon was talking about not doing. And so now is the time to be active and to either fight this project or make it the right sort of project. The Zoning Board of Appeals is the last chance to stop it. Please mark your calendar to attend the meeting on April 8th at 7:15. For more information, he suggested contacting Jack Madigan. And I'm going to just put this announcement in the chat, which you can see, which will have Jack's email address here. Okay. So there was a message in the chat about the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting. Would anybody else have an announcement? I see one here. I'm going to I'm trying to figure out how to do this. How do we do this? Unmute. Ask to unmute. Okay.
Hi.
Hi,
Yes.
Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya Bartavyan-Galis. I want to inform people that there is some outside pressure to pave the Reformatory Branch Trail, which is already a multi-use trail used by cyclists. It goes by Great Meadows. It hosts endangered species like the Blanding's turtle. And there are outside groups who want to pave all trails that are bikeable, and there have been some attempts made to do it through the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail Committee, and that sort of has tapered off because there was evidence that there was some unauthorized collaboration between Bedford and Concord, and now. That may still happen, but it's also important to watch the Transportation Advisory Committee's meetings that usually take place second Wednesday in April, and their biking subcommittee, which might be first Wednesday in April, and they usually post the meetings very late. So I just wanted to inform people that about that going on in town, and it's in its beginning stages, but it's good to be vigilant. Thank you.
Thank you. If you send an explanation, we can put it in the newsletter.
Thank you very much. I will do that. Thank you.
So we have a Beverly.
Yes, just wanted to add to that comment about 1440 Main Street. If you sent a letter to the planning board at that stage in the process about the soil removal and the special permit, it will not be carried over to the Zoning Board of Appeals. You have to send a separate letter all over again to the Zoning Board of Appeals in order for it to be registered. Thanks.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raising. And so there's a bunch of questions that have come in, a whole lot of questions, and I can ask them to Sharon. First is, what do you think of Doug Tommy's books about creating biodiversity in suburban settings?
Oh, those are excellent. I have them, and they are wonderful guides for restoring the nature on your property. So I highly recommend them. He's one of the best sources. There are many on the internet that you can get ideas about how to restore lawn, garden, property of various acreages. So yeah, there's a lot of sources, but Doug's is an excellent one. Okay,
we should make sure they're all in the library. There was a comment about, okay, can you explain how biochar works to draw down carbon?
Yeah, that is a process that uses really the scraps from agriculture, and it's a combustion process that produces the biochar. It's like a coal that captures the carbon. You can bury it in the ground, and it stores the carbon. And so that's the one exception where your biogenic carbon is actually being stored and the carbon is captured in the process. So that's one. It's a soil amendment, and it can help to restore soil carbon, but also soil biology. It's a wonderful product that is being produced, but not yet at scale. There's a lot of work to try to get it to be produced at scale so that it can be used as much as on as many land areas as possible. But that is the one exception to biogenic carbon that I note that is it is good. It's actually beneficial to climate and biodiversity and ecosystem restoration.
Very good. There's a question on how can we better inform our town committees about net carbon sink and make it more of a town policy. It goes along with our sustainability principles, which are town policy.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, I've actually spoken about this with Kate Hanley, and I know she's interested. When she produced her plan, the climate plan, she said that she was interested in this, wanted to see if we could incorporate that in the next iteration of the plan. So I think that's wonderful. And, you know, Kate's a great start, and hopefully we can see this happening in other areas, other plans and programs in Concord, so that we begin to not only move forward aggressively with the emissions piece, but also on the restoration piece for carbon drawdown.
Right. Now, for smaller towns, which don't tend to have a big budget set aside for this, how can they achieve carbon sink? Can the state help? What do you see? How do you see that working?
You mean in terms of funding restoration projects?
Yeah.
That's a great question. I see the Community Preservation Act as one source. That the Community Preservation Act does allow for funding of restoration. So that's one possibility. There's also working with the State Division of the Ecological Restoration as a partner. And if you have a project that they're interested in, they will help to fund that restoration. So those are two that come to mind. The hope is that over time, we're going to see more foundations contributing money to this, supporting land trusts in the restoration of their properties where they need soil amending and restoration, and other restoration of ecosystems. So I think there's a lot of potential sources. Those are some of the ones that I think are possible, and we need to start and trying to get funds to come from these places.
Can you mention some specific actions that a typical household can take to achieve net carbon sink?
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly whatever you can do to restore natives in your backyard, and you know, if you have a landscaper, they are increasingly starting to do more organic regenerative work and planting of natives. If you can just start with your garden and try to get more natives in your garden, try your best to remove invasives. That's very important so the natives can take hold. So you can do what you can outside and try to retain water on the landscape through rain barrels and trying to restore the rainwater to the ground and so forth. And then on the inside, you can do your energy piece, you know, trying to go with renewable energy, energy efficiency, and also very importantly, your decision-making in other ways in what you consume. You can become very much a very mindful consumer so that you're checking labels and making sure you're not purchasing things that, for example, have palm oil in them or in other ways impacting the environment. So your role as a consumer, how you manage your household, the products you buy, there are so many ways that you can benefit ecosystems as well as reduce emissions.
Right. Okay, so there was a question and comment about using net carbon sink as justification for regulations requiring integrating biodiversity and green infrastructure into development. Vegetated roofs are one thing, and as a complement to solar PV. Any comments on that?
Yeah, you know, it's true that it takes takes a while for regulations to catch up with where we are right now with the need for better protecting the environment, restoring it. And so I would encourage anyone who wants to work on that and advocate before the local towns for bylaws, before the state for legislation, before the state environmental agencies for regulation. And at the federal level, please do. We need all of the above. And that's going to take time, but we need to get started and try to get more of that. But in the meantime, there's so much we can do without regulation that we have to do. And one of the things that I'm encouraging is in the projects that I've been commenting on in Concord, I've been asking the project applicants to do a better job of coming forward with responsible projects that are going to be safe for the environment and reduce emissions, that protect and restore nature rather than alter it. And so I think we need to try to ask the development community to take more responsibility. We're lucky to live in a town that is very good with environmental protection. And we just need the project proposals to be different, commensurate with where we are with the climate crisis. So I'm hoping to see that as well.
Okay, and here's a question. Isn't a plant-based diet essential to restoring our environment? More rainforests being destroyed to raise beef as developing countries adopt our meat diet?
Yes, yes, yes. Go with a plant-based diet as much as you can. That is the driving force. The industrial agriculture is the driving force of biodiversity losses. We have to do better with that. And so I encourage, definitely going in that direction as much as possible, and also extending to other ways we consume nature. We have to reduce our consumption overall, which is a topic we could address, for a good length of time at another meeting. But yes, we have to reduce consumption in many ways, including shifting as much as we can to plant-based diet.
There's a couple more questions. There's so many stuff in the chat. It's very full of stuff. Other organizations working with towns or homeowners that you're aware of on becoming net carbon sinks?
Not, if you're talking about like some of the statewide nonprofits, the land trusts, I think are maybe beginning to do that, but there isn't a lot of, working with the communities on that of nonprofits, but let's try to encourage the land trusts to do a bit more of this, and they need funding to accomplish that. And I believe that land trusts, they need money not only for acquisition, but they need money for restoration of their properties. So if we can try to help them to get that funding. But I think that will grow over time. We're going to start seeing more and more of that. We have seen, for example, Mass Audubon restoring Tidmarsh in Plymouth. So there's more of that happening. And try to connect with whatever organizations you're associated with, nonprofits, to see if we can start moving in that direction where there's more attention to net carbon sink and ecosystem restoration to accomplish that.
Now, a couple of the places that have been mentioned in the chat by people are Russell's Garden Center that sells biochar, the Toad Shade Wildflower Farm, and Prairie Moon Nursery are great sources for local species. If these bring any others to mind,
the Native Plant Society, if I have that right, used to be the New England Wildflower. They have a garden center. They have a lot of natives you can source from there. And they're increasingly, nurseries are carrying more native species. So even, locally, we have several that are, and I encourage you to really shop around, and you'll find an increasing number of natives available locally.
Great. So thank you so much. We're almost at the end of the hour. And there's a few, I think I got the comments. So for people, is anybody raising their hand? Two people have raising their hand. So I'd like to unmute one. Joseph Stein, did you have a comment?
Hi, Yeah, hi, Brad. I just want to say thanks everyone for just a fantastic presentation. Just really quick, I'm a Concord resident, and I'm also a member of the Trustees for Public Land, which is a great organization. I just found out that they have an opportunity to protect 130,000 acres of Montana wilderness, which is just a massive carbon sink. So if folks are interested, definitely check it out, tpl.org. Thanks.
Okay, put that in the
Great.
chat if you would.
Wonderful.
Share that. Okay, I see Bob Andrews has a comment.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I think it was a great presentation. I can't help but think that, what can and should be done, to implement these ideas, they don't necessarily get done. And what can be done isn't necessarily what will be done. And I'm thinking especially of the national level, and the whole Green New Deal, proposal that is waiting in the wings for some kind of implementation.
Yeah.
Has net carbon sink begun in any way to find its way into the, to the thinking of those in Washington who are seeking to implement a Green New Deal or some approximation there too?
Right. That's a great question, Bob. And in fact, I don't know specifically about net carbon sink because I actually just don't hear that term being used. I started to think about this when I was sitting on the Healthy Soils Action Plan for the state and got some great feedback from people who were on that committee with me, fellow scientists and policymakers. And so I'm trying to advance that, and I do want to connect with the Green New Deal. Varshini, I would like to actually invite her to my yard to see the restoration and try to get them to include this more prominently in the Green New Deal. So I'm working on that, and also connecting up with Gina McCarthy in Washington. She's a friend and former colleague, and I believe she has a counterpart who's working on the nature piece of climate. Gina's focus is on emissions and energy. So there is somebody there who seems to be the point person on that, which I will be trying to be connecting with that person. So I think that we need to also work with Congress. I encourage people to be in touch with our senators, our representatives, and get them thinking about it and trying to work it into their work in Washington. Also our state level representatives and senators as well. So they really, please help. We need to advocate for this.
Okay, last raised hand is Janet Miller. Are you there?
I am here, yes. I just wanted to make a point. I just wanted to say that I put a link to a presentation which was recorded from the Pepperell environmental group on biochar. And I learned a lot from that. So if you want to learn more about it, I recommend it. It's in the link is in the chat. That's all I'm
Okay.
Great,
So
thank you.
we're at the end of the hour, and I'm just going to open it up for a total free-for-all so that anybody can unmute. But maybe you should stop sharing your screen, and then everybody's face will be on there, and it'll be kind of the end of the recording.
So I can stop sharing my screen, you're saying?
Stop sharing.
Yep, great.
Anybody can unmute themselves.
Perfect. And I also want to say that I can hang around a little longer. I'm really happy to, if people wanted to talk a little bit more after 9.
Can I speak? This is
I'm also
Roger.
available at any time.
This is Roger speaking. Can I speak?
Yeah. Yes.
I'm speaking from the, excuse me, from the UK. And all the discussion is about Concord and Massachusetts and the state level. I'm thinking we're talking here about an emergency, which is an extensional emergency affecting the whole globe. how do we make international politicians take action? Because what you do in your own backyard isn't really going to make very much difference to anybody.
Thank you for asking that question. Thank you for joining us from across the ocean. We have an opportunity. Right now, this year, 2021, is the beginning of the UN declared decade on ecosystem restoration. So there is interest and attention, but there needs to be help from around the world, all countries participating. So I encourage you and anyone to try to connect with that UN level effort and try to make net carbon sink very prominent in the objectives for that program. And that there's going to be participation really around the world in ecosystem restoration. And that is, I think, one major avenue through which we can promote the whole net carbon sink and try to make ecological restoration prominent in the whole climate.
I think anybody who thinks they care about this has really got to start making personal contact with their members of parliament and their senators and making sure that they pay some attention. It's no good sending template letters that have been agreed by nature conservation organizations. You've got to write personally to your MP or your senator and make sure they listen.
Absolutely. We need it. Thank you, Roger. Let's keep talking it up and making this happen.
Thank you.
I would just like to put a plug in for that Kiss the Ground movie that Ben S. Highlighted in the last chat entry. It talks about this internationally, and it's a really good movie. It's on Netflix. Check it out.
It is excellent. Thank you, Bev.
Okay. So we're all sitting in a room together, which is fun, but anybody have anything to add or?
Anybody, Brad, I just wanted to ask, does anybody want to form like a home habitat garden club in Concord where we apply the ideas that Sharon said and sort of inspired by her own backyard, you know, to make all of us really look this coming year and how we can green our gardens in terms of like creating wildlife habitat. That I would love some company as I try to work on this project.
I think you just created one.
Great. Okay. Maybe.
But maybe we need to, and that's a good way. So to act locally and be talking about the global at the same time.
Right, right. And in the next newsletter for Concord Can, maybe I'll try to create something to make us connect. Okay.
Great.
That would be wonderful. Thank you, Susan.
Can people outside of Concord be a part of it as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we'll figure this out. I mean, I see it as like a little seed we can plant in Concord, and I'd love to like have it be something that spreads throughout the entire world.
Right.
But yeah, absolutely.
That would be great.
Hello, this is Mark Galis. I wanted to share a few quick thoughts because I think joining, you know, in terms of getting a lot of support, we need to also bring up lots of related issues that are so important to touch more people. Obviously, the carbon sink is important, the biodiversity is important, but also the water cycle and the climate resilience, they're all connected.
Absolutely.
And in terms of reaching out to people and getting local, national, and international action, there are people who somehow relate more quickly to not having water than or having too much water. Look at all the flooding we're having. I'm amazed that in a country like this, we can't reduce all this flooding disasters that are happening every year. And one other thing, in terms of the British gentleman's comment about local versus the power of local versus international action, I think that we all agree education and changing people's mindset and priorities is important. And I believe from my own experience that the experience of having nature where you can touch it educates you about the importance of it everywhere.
Mm,
Okay.
very much so. We need to all get out in nature more and participate in the renewal. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Janet. You have to unmute.
Hi, that works better. I wanted to tell you that Sudbury Valley Trustees has an intern named Matt Morris. It's his second year. I think he's here till August, and he's particularly interested in native pollinator friendly gardens. And I contacted him a few months ago, and we'll be working with him on a pollinator project in our neighborhood. And I'm blanking right now on the other. I think there are two of them. Oh, I know. I referred him to Priscilla Guiney over at the high school because they're interested in putting in one. But for people who are particularly interested in pollinator gardens, you could contact the Sudbury Valley Trustees. Just go to their main number, but it's Matt Morris. If you want his cell phone number, get in touch with me. I'll get it to you. He's with AmeriCorps, and I'm gonna have to go. There's a plumber here. But anyway, yeah, and don't use hybrids. If you get a butterfly bush or something, don't put in a hybrid. Put in a native, because the hybrids have been bred for showiness and they don't necessarily produce the pollen needed for the young or the nectar needed for bees to get energy. So you got to go with the natives. And there are sources around here. I think a guy named Greer and Talamy are the two that Matthew always recommends. But Greer has a whole bunch of information on a website, which I can get you to once I'm a little more awake. So you can get the right plants. Russell's has them and other places around here. Okay. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you, Janet. I'm a purist like that as well. I have tried to get the pure natives, and it's actually more and more available. So
yeah,
it's possible.
Yeah.
Good.
Oh, and Sharon, if I could have your email, I need to talk to you about a prairie sometime.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. I would like that. Yeah, I'm happy to share my email address. I'll give you the Bio for Climate email, which comes to my home email, and that is sharon.mcgregor at bio, then the number 4 climate.org. So sharon.mcgregor at bio4climate.org.
Okay. Thank you.
Anyone. Thank you.
Okay.
You have a beautiful Siamese cat behind you, Janet. Or Burmese cat.
She's a black cat. She's a rescue from central Pennsylvania.
Huh.
I think she'd probably be squashed by a car by now if I hadn't taken her.
Oh, good for you.
There she is.
Great. They've been great COVID companions. We have 2 as well. Great. I just saw in the chat someone mentioned that Russ Cohen as a source. He's an excellent source of information for edible. And that's a great suggestion to Russ Cohen is someone who advises, and he has education programs about edible plants and how you can plant them in your yard or just seek them in nature.
Say something.
I would like to say something.
Yeah.
Some very complex ideas have been, presented this morning. I think it's important that we find ways to, to keep it simple in communicating, these ideas to others. One part of the presentation that I found particularly helpful in that regard was when you talked about, the solar panels that were being put up and put up in an area where you were destroying some natural ecosystems at the same time as you were putting up solar panels.
Right.
It's I think people need these kinds of concrete examples to wrap their heads around this.
Yep. You're right. It's not obvious. It's you have to kind of get behind what's involved, and you have to take a look at wind farms. The materials being used to construct the wind farms, a lot of, I believe, sourcing that is impactful to the environment, and they only have a certain life. And so, yeah, we have to really look at that and try to, in all our decisions, try to be net carbon sink, so that ultimately we're getting more carbon drawdown than we're emitting by the
I just want to
undertaking. Thank you for saying that, Bob. Yes, the complexity is there, and yeah, and what I've done today is it's a beginning to try to break down that complexity, but we can do more work with that and develop the messaging that is understandable to ultimately the general public. We need to.
I think one issue, both with the solar and the wind farms, is that at some point they became profitable and like good for investment. And now they are dominating the discussion, and the protecting nature is not getting as much attention when it's the most basic thing we can do. About wind farms causing harm to migratory birds and marine mammals. These are not, that factor is not given enough attention. So thanks, Bob, for bringing that up. And it's so nice to be in the company of concerned people like this, because it's also sometimes a very lonely struggle to go and speak up, especially when one is not an expert. So
Yeah,
just a member of the public who cares and can see something for what it is, but does not necessarily have the expertise to give a talk. So I appreciate this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Hello there. Bernie Jenkins, and one of the things I'm interested in is we live in a condo village, and a well-established condo village that has landscaping that needs to be dealt with. And I'm wondering if there are people available to come and meet with the trustees and help us establish contacts with people, help us establish the cost of doing something that could be consultants to the trustees as we move ahead and start planning a landscaping of this property.
Yeah, I would encourage you to connect up with the Ecological Restoration Society. Do I have that right? I have to look up the exact name, but they are the membership group for landscapers, native plant garden companies, and so forth. And they are a great source, and they're members of that organization that would be able to come out and help you and consult with the condo association, the trustees on that. So that would be, I can get you the link to their website.
Thank you. That would be helpful.
And I'll make it available. I'll send it to Brad and make it available to everyone.
Sure.
I had another thought, which is that the sustainability principles that were adopted by the town those many years ago are really not always brought up as they should be, I think, in decision making still. And what you were talking about, that example of the solar panels, that were erected in a place where nature was at the same time being destroyed. I mean, avoiding that is what those sustainability principles were all about.
Yeah.
You do not undertake, a project without considering all four principles. And I think time after time, people, start quoting one principle and thinking that they're doing a great thing because they're doing that. The first principle calls for keeping fossil fuels out of the atmosphere, keeping carbon out of the atmosphere. But then the third principle gets into nature and preserving nature. And there's a whole way of thinking about every single project that needs to be, respected and used.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how we make that happen, I think that every decision that the town makes needs to be through the climate and biodiversity screen. And I think that's true of all decision making, because if we don't do that, then we're just not being sustainable. And that is really what we need to do to be sustainable, is put all of our decisions through that screen. So let's work with the town and see how they might be able to bring that about more. Ultimately, we need the sustainability principles brought into the bylaws and regulations somehow. But yeah, let's have conversations with the town about how to do that.
We are hoping to have a coffee later, in the season, where we invite Kate Hanley and the town manager, to be present as presenters in a coffee. And I think we need to, be prepared to raise this kind of question, with them.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Okay.
Yeah, I would just like to point out, I know we're running out of time now, that we're in the middle of struggling with Middlesex School that wants to dig up their playing fields and put in, now it's plastic beads, so artificial turf, and it's going to be all plastic. And there just isn't anything much the Natural Resource Commission can do to block that, because it's private land and there's no laws to work against it. So that's just the project that Grassfields for Safe Sports is working on right now. But it's without the laws having some teeth, we really can't stop it, even though I don't think the commission likes it.
Mm.
Wait a second, did you say the middle school? That
Middlesex.
Middlesex, okay, yes.
Yeah, middle school would be under the town, but Middlesex.
Exactly, okay, thanks.
Private.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, we've got a number of projects that are pending that are quite damaging, and the hope is that these kinds of proposals aren't even brought to the town, that we see the very proposals themselves being put through that screen of climate and biodiversity before they're even introduced. So we need the applicants to take greater responsibility as well.
Okay. Anybody else? Oh, there's one here. Catherine.
Oops. Hi, thank you. I'm new to Concord, moved here from California, and this has been great. To kind of echo the point about it being kind of complicated, sorry, I get out of the sun here. Thinking about the Middlesex, I love that institution. I know people who teach there. It's a really good example of one of these situations where, we can't do anything about it. And yet I think there's also conflicting ideas about whether, having, grass and putting chemicals on it and taking, water and irrigation might be more chemically harmful. I mean, it's sort of like the diapers conundrum coming from California, where it's perpetual drought and there's so much water shortage. There's a question about whether even cloth diapers are more environmental than disposable, which seems sort of ludicrous, but there's real kind of debate and question out there about what's actually more environmentally friendly. And so I guess my question is, how do we tease that out? I mean, those are micro examples. Those aren't going to affect the global, but as we talk about individual decisions and what we can do sort of at the grassroots level, how can we, are there decision trees? Is there a site? Is there some sort of way we can kind of, most things are really obvious, but there are some places where there's debate, and I'm wondering if there's some sort of resource or decision tree or matrix or framework that we can, access publicly to help people really, get it, guide their own personal decisions, but also to sort of say to Middlesex, hey, this is why this is not good for the environment.
Right. No, thank you for raising that, Catherine. The Grass Fields for Safe Sports group that Bev is from, and I am as well, I'm a member of that group. We have been trying to advocate for the natural methods, sustainable turf management. And there are many examples of successful turf management that is less impactful to the environment by far. It's very sustainable. And Bev, can you remind me what those communities are that we've been using as examples? Is the Martha's Vineyard and
Janet, help me out here. I'm blanking on it. It begins with a P, doesn't it?
It's on the North Shore.
Yeah, there's Chuck.
Head is one, and
Manchester by the Sea.
Manchester, yeah. And what did you say, Janet?
Marblehead, and I think
Marblehead, yes.
I mean, they did a lot of research there, and measuring, how playable they were, maintaining them organically, and there were certain methods to make them work better.
Right.
And so, the city of Springfield is another example where they've worked on this. So there is data to show that grass fields work, and this Middlesex project is the reason it's in front of the Natural Resources Commission is because it's very close to wetland. And so they're worried about runoff. So these plastic pellets are going to get into the wetland. They're going to get into the, into the streams, and it's, it's just going to add to the plastic pollution everywhere.
Right.
But Catherine, I think you heard Janet hit the nail on the head with the first thing she said, which is these communities have put a lot of work into researching how turf fields can be better. Well, a lot of work. It's just easier to put in plastic and not think about it.
Right. And we're coming up against the argument made by the proponents of artificial turf that it allows more playing time. But I say that that's a very temporary benefit, because when you add up all of the artificial turf fields around the world, that's a huge amount of land, a huge amount of soil that's lost, soil ecosystem and the vegetation on top of the soil that's being lost. And so ultimately we're moving in a direction where there's going to be less playing time, and there already is for other reasons, and that's weather. That is going to be the way that playing time is significantly reduced. So let's get real and have turf that's sustainable. And, as I've said to Middlesex, their students will thank them because it's their future. They want their future. They want a sustainable one. We have to make sustainable decisions, all of our decisions. It's hard, but it's the better decision. Ultimately, we will all be better, and we have to just change our ways. So,
can I just say, it'll take you about 10 or 15 minutes of the rest of your life to write to your senator and write personally to your senator. It'll take 10 or 15 minutes of the whole of your life, and it's worth doing.
Unfortunately, it isn't here because our senators are completely on board already. We should write to other states.
Yeah.
And if you know people in Middlesex, Catherine, teachers in Middlesex, let them know about this project and tell them to just get involved, just do the research, find out about it. I'd be very interested to know what the students would vote if they were given the option of voting for artificial turf or for natural grass fields, given that they have to live with the consequences of our decisions.
Right.
In my experience, it's been not the players, it's the parents and funders who really they get the idea of an artificial field and they can't do without it.
Yeah.
Which they,
We've seen that.
Garrett.
Historically, it was the board members in favor of development of athletic fields and the faculty and students against it, but the board prevailed, at least in the past. So it's the funders, it's the champions, that kind of stuff. Same here.
Right. So yeah, a lot of work to be done there as well. Yeah, for any project that proposes removing soil, question it. Look at the alternatives. We have to protect our soils, foundational to healthy ecosystems. We can't just keep destroying that at the rate that we have been. We're already seeing the effects of having done that. We need a complete sea change in how we treat the land.
So I'm going to suggest that we shut down in 1 minute at 9:30, and that everybody meets up again on Earth Day with a beautiful Earth Day banner. I'm just showing you my art project. But it's really great to have everybody here, I must say. And I'm looking forward to the next. We're going to be energized to do this again as soon as we can organize it, which will be, I think, in May.
Wonderful.
Anybody have any parting comments?
Is there an event on Earth Day? Could you explain that, Brad?
Well, it's a little bit on the virtual side. We're not all vaccinated yet. But, we should be prepared to make some trouble. How about Janet? What do you have to say?
A great film on soil is Dirt, the Ecstatic Skin of the Earth. I think it's actually based on a book also. And Sharon, when I was teaching at Drumlin Farm, I was put in charge of the soils program one day, and I looked at that film and I went into it thinking, oh geez, I got to work on dirt. And I came out thinking, oh my God, like it's the source of life. So I totally recommend it, as it goes into it in depth. And it's it really changed my thinking.
What's the name of that again, Jen?
Dirt, the Ecstatic Skin of the Earth. I think I've got that right.
Could you write that in the chat for us, please?
Yes, I will. But really, the soil is the beginning of everything. Rainforests worth of microbes in there munching away at things, mycorrhizal fungi exchanging information, chemicals, soil, carbon, carbohydrates. Anyway, have fun. I'll put it in the chat somewhere here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, it's been a pleasure having everybody. I look forward to seeing you again as soon as we can. And everybody stays safe, and we'll be out of this pandemic before we know it. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. And thank you, Concord Can.
Bye-bye. So I'll be sharing the link. It will share the link to the presentation in the newsletter. And if you're not a member of the newsletter, you can sign up on concordcan.org.
Well, thank you for organizing it. Thank you, Sharon, for a wonderful talk.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming.